Our final speaker for the future of culture is Leigh Carmichael. Leigh is the creative director of Mona and Dark Mofo and a producer of Mona Foma and a graphic designer. He is also project managing a new cultural and creative industry hub in the heart of Hobart. How fantastic. Please welcome Leigh Carmichael to speak about creative risk.
Thanks to the organisers for the invite. I'm happy to be here in Melbourne. Wow, 7 days of pause. You guys must know just about everything by now. I'm not sure what I can add to that. I've been invited to talk about the future of culture, but the problem is I don't know all that much about it, and to be honest, I've no idea what it looks like. So I did some research and found someone who knows a little bit more about it than me.
Now, if you're playing the movie on a telephone, you will never in a trillion years experience the film. You'll think you have experienced it, but you'll be cheated. It's such a sadness that you think you've seen a film on your fucking telephone. Get real.
I'm pretty sure the future of cultural experience isn't on the iPhone. So I guess I'm here because over the past 8 years, or I think it's actually closer to 10 now, I need to update my speech, I've been lucky enough to work as part of the team developing Mona, which many of you would now be aware. So I know a little bit about that. Mona is now being talked about as being at the forefront of contemporary cultural experience in Australia, and so I guess it makes sense that we'd be asked for our opinion about what the future of culture might look like. So here I am trying to fit together something I know a little bit about with something I know nothing about. But because Mona's a juggernaut, people somehow think that maybe we know what we're doing, or maybe it's luck. According to David Walsh, it is a bit of both. I happen to think, though, that fortune favours the brave. So being brave is about the journey, not the destination. So rather than guess around at what the future might look like, I'm going to share my thoughts and experiences on the things that I've observed while working at Mona. And one of the things that Mona is defined by is taking creative risk. So I'm going to mostly focus on that. So just on Thursday, in fact, there was an article in The Conversation by David Pledger titled, "Only Bravery Can Save Artists from Australia's Elite Arts Clubhouse." He argues that artists and organisations need to stand up to the establishment, think and act outside the institutional box, or run the risk of seeing the whole thing end up in the doghouse. Anyone who's ever dealt with the Australia Council knows what he's talking about. I'll quote from the article. "Enter David Walsh, a real and present danger to the clubhouse. Mona, the private museum funded by Walsh in Tasmania, is a provocation that sits outside the norm, a brilliant mongrel of an idea that blindsided the establishment. I've not encountered a cultural enterprise that solicits such positive response from as broad a demographic as Mona." And he went on to say, "For artists who do not stand up for fear of losing what little agency they possess, and for institutions terrified they'll be punished for criticising government, the lesson is simple. Courage is a process, risk is a friend." Now, in my mind, there's very little doubt that this applies to most creative endeavours. And he's touched on two things that I've been thinking and talking about for some time now: courage and risk. So we've also been doing it for a while. So I want to show you a couple of examples. The first one's something we did back in 2009 to promote our first Mona Foma Festival. It's the first time we had been given any money from government. We were still a few years away from opening the museum. And we're a little bit nervous about being associated with government that far out. Anyway, we spent the money wisely. we did an illegal street art graffiti guerrilla campaign. And we gave the street artists some stickers and black pens and said, don't write on them. Of course they did, and it was perfect for us. That was pretty brave, and we weren't sure whether we'd get any funding again, but 9 festivals later, and we're still working with government. The next two, I'll show you, the same event, happened a couple of years ago when we launched Dark Mofo over here in Melbourne. And this was, over all the things we've done at Mona, and we've been out on a limb, this was the most scared that I've ever been.
Coin toss before the game. There's been some funny coin tosses this year, so I'm not sure what to make of this. This is apparently art. I'm not really sure what that is, and I don't think Brian Lake knows what it is either. Have a look at him. He's a double take, doesn't he? Have a look. He was a bit off put for the first 5 minutes, Lake. He didn't know what to think of this. Have a look at him.
Well, you're not expecting that on a match.
Fascinating stuff. Plenty more to come.
Well, no, I'm just about done.
The game needs you.
Well, I thought, you know what, I'm just about going to put my cue in the rack. When I saw this the other night, and here we are for the time-honoured toss of the coin.
What's going on?
What the hell is going on? Is that Dermot Brereton under there? I don't know. I give up. This game has passed me by.
There's a game of footy. No, stick with it, Mickey. We need you as part of this great game of ours. There's a game played down in Tasmania where that person came from today, and it was...
They changed the rules after that, and you can't dress up anymore if you want to toss the coin. We tried it we tried the next year, and we found out. So you can take on the institutions, but they probably win in the end. We got what we wanted. Courage and risk. Courage is a process, risk is a friend. So I think it's absolutely true. So it seems maybe David Pledger has cut to the chase and saved me 15 minutes of my talk. It's a picture of David Walsh. For those of you that don't know, David's a professional gambler and makes his fortune by betting when the odds are in his favour. And over time and in the long run, he wins. A formula based on maths, not luck, but worth noting, not without risk. He also just bought himself a Tesla, which arrived a few weeks ago. In recent years, he's spent his money on an art collection and building Mona to house it, a combined worth now of over 200 million and growing. Mona's a contemporary art organisation 20 minutes north of Hobart. There's also a winery, brewery, restaurant, accommodation on site. We run functions and events, 2 festivals a year, and we have a fairly solid cultural program. But none of those things on their own are unique. So why, as David Pledger suggests, does Mona solicit such a positive response from such a broad demographic? Well, there are many reasons. David's an interesting story in and of himself, but I believe it's primarily because he has been able to create something new, actually new, a new cultural experience that goes against the current model and standard of thinking. Unlike the gambling operations that financially supports Mona, the museum actually bets against the odds, or certainly against the norm, and went against the established standard museum approach and rules. From the hang, the collection, the interpretive material, the tone, marketing, branding, management, funding, every aspect breaks the rules. Its success may actually be as simple as that. But I have to say, it hasn't been easy. I was there during the build, and I can honestly say that at times he had a majority of his own team telling him that he needed to do it the way a real museum would, or we'd face being the laughing stock of the art world. Now, not everyone remembers this. Success does interesting things to memory, but I can tell you it's absolutely the case. But David stuck to his guns. At times it must have been fairly lonely. He had a lot to lose, not just the money, but this was his life's work, and obviously it was a big canvas, and if it failed, it was going to fail big. 2 years before it opened, I remember on the local ABC radio, there was a segment discussing whether or not we were actually building Tasmania's biggest white elephant. And I also remember there was a time, about similar period, about 2 years before we opened, when I went into as the de facto marketing manager, as we didn't have one. David didn't believe in marketing at the time. And I presented our case to Tourism Tasmania looking for some early support. There's about 10 to 12 people sitting around the board table with really blank looks on their faces. And after telling them all the weird and wonderful things that we had planned, there was silence. And I heard later that their strategy was to be supportive, but keep a good distance and see how it was going to go, and try to avoid any collateral damage if it went bad. There was no way that government were going to go down with us. But seriously, no one at that stage really knew how Mona was going to play out, and that included us. So I'd like to look a little more closely at risk, as I think this is the part that has implications for anybody wanting to realise new ideas and be at the forefront of their field. I don't believe that it's possible to truly innovate, embrace change, push boundaries, break new ground, be at the vanguard of creativity without seriously engaging with risk at the same time. Risk and new ground are inherently linked. It's also impossible to create anything new if you're following a previously walked track. So I'd like to quote Joseph Campbell, who said, "You enter the forest at the darkest point where there's no path. Where there's a way or a path, it's someone else's path. You're not on your own. If you follow someone else's way, you're not going to realise your full potential." So if you want to truly innovate, push boundaries, you've got to create your own way, you've got to create your own path. If you're looking for some sort of guide, it's not going to be new ground. This is the only place where true creativity and innovation can exist, where no one else has been. And if it really is a place where no one else has been, then it goes without saying that it's dangerous. If you don't have your money, your job, your reputation, or your future opportunities on the line, then I think you're kidding yourself if you think it's dangerous or you're in a dangerous place. I often hear people say, if I had the money, I'd take the risk. I'm not sure I buy it, because without the money or the reputation, you've got a lot less to lose. So I think potentially it's a cop-out. I think we can take risk at any stage of our career or organisation's life. Now, the big problem with risk is that there's no way to make it safe. There's not a safety hat for risk. You can identify it, assess it, manage it, reduce it, but you can't eliminate it if you still want to call it risk. If you manage to make it safe, it's no longer dangerous, then I suggest you've probably watered down the innovation to a point where it may no longer even be interesting. Now, by all means, form a committee. They'll make the project safer, but they can't make risk safe. So if you subscribe to this theory, the conclusion is that in order to create something new, innovative, mind-changing, then you've got to be brave, you've got to take a risk, and you've got to live dangerously. It's not necessarily what everyone wants to hear, but it is the case in my experience at Mona. This has certainly been the case. We've been on the edge pretty much right from the start, both financially and artistically. It's a long and interesting story, and I won't go into the detail today, obviously. I don't have time. But David has created something that's actually new, and not just new in a marketing campaign. I believe this is the primary reason why we consider to be at the vanguard of the cultural movement in Australia. So are there any lessons out of this that I can share with those who do want to be at the forefront of innovation in their chosen field? Or maybe. Of course, there's sensible risk and stupidity. The risk I'm talking about is calculated, planned, organised and resourced. And it's still scary, but I'm not talking about stupidity. There's nothing like a bit of danger to get the adrenaline moving, and you need to have some skin in the game. Your own skin's a great motivator. It always tends to focus your mind. And of course, the innovation that I'm talking about is real innovation, not just a variation of an existing idea dressed up in new clothes. The other thing is giving people an opportunity to live and die by their own decisions, and the results that follow is another key idea that's worked at Mona. Self-motivation is a much more powerful force, and it's amplified when there is skin in the game. And of course, as I touched on before, destroying the committees is another good idea. By all means, workshops, group meetings, etc., they're fine, but don't give committees power to sign off anything creative. They'll make the project safer and they'll kill the good ideas at the same time. I'm still looking for an example where that isn't the case. Every time I go into a committee meeting, I'm thinking maybe this is going to break my theory. I'm still looking. Committees and bureaucracy are the enemy of innovation and creativity. Now, not all committees are bad. I'm specifically referring to those that get in the way of innovation. If you've no interest in the new and want safe, no problem. Committees are fine to organise the end of the year party. Maybe tick off some OH&S issues, but don't let them near the creatives. At times during the development of Mona, committees or groups formed organically, and often after spending weeks together, all agreeing that we should be doing it more like the MCA or the NGV, or the project was going to be doomed for failure, someone would be required to tell David our position. Often he wasn't anywhere near those meetings. He'd squash it like an ant, and the various members would scurry off almost. He almost never listened to a committee position on how to make Mona. What he did was he singled us out. He wouldn't let us hide in a group. And if it's your idea, you stand by it, you back it, or you don't do it. That's the choice. You live and die by it. He wanted to know who truly believed in it. If you're prepared to put your own skin in the game, it usually means that there's a fairly good idea that you're serious about your idea. And under these circumstances, it's also pretty important that you get it right. Now, some people won't handle the pressure, and that's fine. They just hang around. As long as they remain committed to the team and playing their role, that's a good thing too. I mean, after all, you don't need everyone in the group going crazy. And I find that it's the creatives, and when, I agree with Helen, creatives, I'm not just talking about the creatives in the traditional sense. Anyone with creative idea is what we're really talking about here. But people that are creative revel in this kind of organisation. They love the pressure and they excel. This model allows for those prepared to back their judgment a chance to do it. So, the thing that Mona's done that's quite unique, although maybe not after hearing Helen's talk, but it's that he empowered the creatives and brought them up to the same level as the accountants and the senior management, especially during the development phase. So things have changed since we opened, but when we were creating the thing and it didn't exist, that's when he really he brought the creatives in around him so that they had his ear and they had a lot of influence over the project. So in effect, he increased the power and influence of the creatives within the organisation structure and then empowered them to manage their own ideas and projects. He put some safeguards in place to reduce the financial fallout, but ultimately the creatives have to manage and take responsibility for that themselves. So in my experience, it's worked. Employ people, let them create, let them innovate, and move the internal barriers and clear the way for the creatives to take on bigger battles than the internal naysayers and the committees. It's an amazing thing to watch, especially as it's fairly rare. And after all, good creatives generally put enough pressure on themselves to succeed without needing the operations manager telling them it won't work. It's equally amazing to watch these types disappear when things do work. So in summary, in order to break new ground, you've got to embrace change, be brave, take a risk, knowing that your skin's on the line. Ignore the statement about not being afraid to take risk. Be afraid, but take it anyway. Challenge the established views, break the rules. Allow people the opportunity to live and die by their own decisions. Back them. Allow for some failure. And destroy the committees. The real challenge is risk, exposing yourself to it, embracing it, thriving in it, managing it, while being acutely aware that at any moment you are in a dangerous space and you could be burnt. It's not a bad thing. You could be burnt badly, but if you want to innovate, that's the price you've got to be willing to pay. And it seems to me that chaos is more closely aligned with creativity than order, something that organisations are going to need to get a grasp on if they want to remain at the forefront and creativity within their industry. So, just to relate this back to the original question for the talk around the future of culture, I think it's going to go the way it'll go, whether or not it's new, worthwhile and significant on a world stage will largely depend on on the people within it to be brave and be prepared to take on the institutions and the normal way of doing things. It's also affected by the type of environments that we create and provide for those willing to push boundaries. So if interesting people are doing interesting things, when that's happening, new ideas will thrive and we barely need to concern ourselves with the future. And at least that way, regardless of the outcome, it should be worth watching. Now, I think in Australia there'll always be rebels, and so in that sense, I think the future of contemporary culture is in good hands. Now, I just want to finish with one short video about leadership and creating a movement. It only goes for a couple of minutes, but it shows just how easy it is to create a movement and change the world.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut and it's not two nuts. 3 is a crowd and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap what we've learned. If you are a version of the shirtless dancing guy, all alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals, making everything clearly about the movement, not you. Be public, be easy to follow. But the biggest lesson here, did you catch it? Leadership is overglorified. Yes, it started with the shirtless guy, and he'll get all the credit, but you saw what really happened. It was the first follower that transformed a lone nut into a leader. There's no movement without the first follower. See, we're told that we all need to be leaders, but that would be really ineffective. The best way to make a movement, if you really care, is to courageously follow and show others how to follow. When you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first person to stand up and join in.
And I'll finish with just a statement that David said to me a few years ago when we decided to do the Dark Mofo Festival in the middle of winter in Hobart. Take the risk, just get it right. Thanks.
Thank you, Leigh. Oh man, the leadership aspect of this is so important. A colleague of mine, Emily Atkins, who's the director of Drama Victoria, talks about leadership as you need to lead from where you are. Because leadership, of course, is influential change. You know, it's certainly not hierarchical, as Helen and others were saying. Now, you must have all sorts of questions for Leigh, so race down to the microphones. Does that guy know he's sneaking out? He's not asking a question at all. You, fabulous.
When taking on risky projects, often it comes up, so what's your plan B? How do you approach that?
Sorry, I missed the first little bit.
When approaching risky projects, often people are proposed, so what's your plan B? how do you approach the establishment of Plan B when Plan A already has a hell of a lot of work 24/7, all on your shoulders?
No pressure.
I'm not sure I don't entirely understand the question, sorry. But
are you prepared for pivoting, having another approach, doing something?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just in good planning.
Yeah.
We have Plan B, C, and D. Sometimes you throw caution to the wind, but I mean, I think that goes into that stupidity thing that I mentioned. You know, there's taking a risk, and then there's just being stupid. So I think the risk that we take, I mean, we consider it, and there's no way you can't. You don't know which way it's going to go. I think you plan for it and see what happens. But yeah, we always have Plan B. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to take one more question from someone else. And while you are coming to the microphone, I've got a question, because something that has always struck me about the Mona model is the extraordinary idiosyncrasy of it. So there's bravery and there's risk and there's great courage. But what you see is a really highly idiosyncratic collection that David has made over time. And there's that, you know, it often strikes me that there's very little that is more stimulating or arousing than someone just expressing their passions. And we get to get let into that. Is that something that, it sounds like it's something that's encouraged across the organisation, but the idiosyncratic can be hard to communicate. So how does that kind of happen in the way that you all work together?
Well, I think for me personally, but also I've now got a team of 20 in the communications department, but it was just me. I was lucky. I got to spend quite a lot of time with him early. And I mean, the brand is an extension of him, so trying to get to understand him and know him allowed me to do that, and now we seem to be able to replicate it. But the thing is, as Helen said, it's about values. And one of the things, before one of my first media interviews, I said to David, you know, what should I say? And he just said, just tell the truth. So I was like, awesome. All I have to do is tell the truth. Nothing else matters. So I think there's things that we can do really quickly at Mona. We feel it, you know, we are a marketing machine, but we're just a truthful marketing machine. We're not actually trying to play tricks. We're not luring anyone in against their will. We're kind of just doing it. So I think when the rule is you be honest, you kind of can't go wrong.
Yep. I like that. The last question from this lady.
Hello, Leigh. My question is, how did you get involved with David?
I was a freelance graphic designer, and I'd done the hard yards. I'd stayed in Hobart. I had a really good folio and a very empty wallet after 10 years, and got the opportunity to design the Moobrew labels with John Kelly, the artist. And after a year of that, and going through all this risk process, everyone internally thought it was going to be a disaster, you know, it was too close to the art world, et cetera, et cetera. It was it was a pretty hard project to work on, but David stuck to his guns. I learnt a lot about him and how to work with him. And at the end of that year, the labels, against everyone's better judgment, started winning awards and doing well. The beer did well. And so he dropped the museum plans on my desk and said, do you want to leave your business and come and work for me? So I knew nothing about the museum, and neither did anyone else when I started on the Moobrew project, which was 2006. So it's been an interesting journey, and I just hang on.
Great, thanks.
Now, if only we had more time for more questions. You can track back on the hashtag, obviously stay in touch with each other and keep these discussions going. But please join me in thanking not only Leigh Carmichael, but Jess Scully, Helen Souness and Nimrod Weiss for all these great provocations on the future of culture. Thank you.